The Graveyard and the Soul, Nichiren's Kaimoku Sho. Here is a strange question to begin with. Could Nichiren have written the Kaimoku Sho from Ichinosawa? It sounds like a question about geography, because the text tells you exactly where it was written, on the island of Sado, in the snow. But the real question isn't geography, it's conditions. What a person writes when they are warm and safe, and what the same person writes when they are not. And my answer, after sitting with this a long time, is no. The Kaimoku Sho could not have been written from Ichinosawa. Not because Nichiren couldn't have, but because from Ichinosawa, he wouldn't have needed to. And once you see that, the whole text becomes something other than what 7 centuries of Nichiren Buddhists have taken it to be. Let me be honest about where I start, because it's not comfortable for someone who has spent a lifetime in this tradition. The Kaimoku Sho is, for me, among the least satisfying of all the major Gosho. I find it self-validating, messianic, self-aggrandizing in the extreme. I think it has worked across the centuries as a banner of fundamentalism, doing more than almost any of Nichiren's writings to make Nichiren Buddhism look reactionary and sectarian to the wider world. If I were naming the 5 writings that show Nichiren at his best, this one would not make the list. And yet, by the end of this, I want to put it back, for reasons that have nothing to do with the ones the tradition gives. The trouble with the text is that its argument is circular. The Lotus Sutra prophesies that a persecuted practitioner will arise in the latter age. Nichiren is persecuted, therefore Nichiren is that practitioner. And then the loop closes. Only the true practitioner can correctly name his enemies. So Nichiren names them, and in naming them, confirms that he is the one the prophecy pointed to. Every attack on him becomes proof he's right. Every objection becomes proof the objector is corrupt. And this is the machinery that has been so corrosive through the whole history of the Nichiren schools. That prophet-martyr figure has buried again and again a far more interesting Nichiren underneath. The serious student of Zhiyi, doing original work on consciousness and on what the eternal Buddha really means for practice. So let's go to the graveyard and look at the conditions he was living in. He'd been taken to a place called Tatsunokuchi, where, by his own account, an execution was attempted and then aborted. The experience was, in his words, like undergoing his own death. He writes about himself afterward in the third person, as a soul that survived a beheading. That's not a metaphor a person chooses lightly. Something in him had gone to the edge and come back changed. Then they took him to Sado and put him in the Samaido, a small, broken-down hall in a graveyard used for funeral rites. And that placement was itself an insult, because in the Japan of that time, handling the dead was work left to the lowest and most marginalized people. He left us a description. The roof boards didn't meet. The walls were full of holes. Snow piled up inside and didn't melt. He had no proper clothing and not enough food. People who wanted him dead loitered around the hut day and night. He'd been put there to die and thought his odds of surviving even the month were 1 in 10,000. And it was there, in February, in the depths of a brutal winter, with barely any paper and ink, that he wrote the Kaimoku Sho, expecting to be killed at any moment. Then, that April, everything changed. He was moved across the island to Ichinosawa, to the home of a supporter, a house, stability, better access to books. And it was from there, a full year later, that he wrote his real philosophical masterwork, the Kanjin Honzon Sho. Same man, same island, same exile. And they are not the same kind of writing at all. Now, here is the line that has always stood apart for me. In the middle of all the proofs and testimonies, Nichiren writes, "I may be the richest man in Japan today." And it does something the rest of the text never does. It drops the cosmic framing completely. No prophecy, no enemies, none of the machinery turning. There is just a man alone in a graveyard, in the snow, expecting to be killed. Who says that he is rich? And means it. That is the first noble truth, fully digested rather than just deployed. Life has suffering. This specific, nearly unbearable life has suffering. And the Dharma is not an escape hatch from that. It is a way of being with it. That one line is the difference between using the Dharma as a weapon, which is most of what this text does, and inhabiting it, which is what that sentence does. To my ear, it's the best thing in the whole work, and the thing least like the rest of it, which brings me to the heart of it. What if the Kaimoku Sho wasn't just written for his followers? What if Nichiren was writing it as much as anything for himself? Think about the man, alone in a funeral hall in the snow, genuinely expecting to die, abandoned by many who had followed him, feeling, maybe, that even the gods and Buddhas he'd staked his whole life on had gone silent. Under conditions like that, a person doesn't sit down to compose theology. A person writes himself back into coherence. He reaches for whatever tools he has and builds out of them a raft to keep from going under. Read that way, the circular structure stops looking like triumphalism and starts looking like something far more human. A man in the middle of an existential crisis, seeking to make meaning of his situation, which is exactly what our Buddhist practice is for. Not for the good days when your mind is clear and you can write philosophy. Practice is for the cold hell, for the hour when the only sound by your pillow is the wind, and the only sight each morning is the snow burying the road. I am the richest man in Japan is not a boast thrown at the world. It may be a man talking himself back from the edge. And of course, the conditions produce the text. The graveyard wrote the Kaimoku Sho. A year of safety wrote the Kanjin Honzon Sho. Same man, different conditions, genuinely different fruit. What extremity produces is the apparatus of cosmic significance, because that's what survival at the far edge reaches for. So let me turn myself around, the way the evidence has forced me to. I want to be careful with a phrase like the real Nichiren. To say the philosopher is the real Nichiren and the polemicist a distortion just runs the same erasure in the other direction. We all carry good qualities and bad ones, and our conditions draw out the best and the worst in us. Nichiren is not some fixed essence that circumstances reveal or hide. He is, like every one of us, a stream of conditioned responses, and that impermanence cuts straight through a person, as surely as it cuts through everything else, is itself a Dharma teaching. What the richest man in Japan line proves is that both registers were available to him. Even at the very bottom, he could reach that equanimity even on Sado, even in the snow. He just couldn't sustain it across the whole text. And that, too, is deeply human. So I put the Kaimoku Sho back among the writings I would keep, not as theology and not as the charter the schools have made of it, but as a Dharma journal, written by a human being at the absolute edge, finding his way back to himself with the only tools he had. The Kanjin Honzon Sho is Nichiren at his philosophical best. The Kaimoku Sho is Nichiren at his most human, and it turns out both are worth having. So, could he have written it from Ichinosawa? No, he wrote it from the graveyard, because the graveyard is where it was needed, and the person who needed it most, that February, in the snow, was Nichiren himself.